Deansgate. It's the reason Manchester as we know it exists. The Romans built their fort alongside what became it. The first passenger railway in the world terminated a few hundred yards from it. The tallest building outside of London, at the time, was built on it. Manchester owes a lot to this ruler straight 3/4 mile of road. It was, in 1922, numbered as part of the A56, and a century later it still is, despite the fact you can no longer drive the full length of it. This is because of a new cycle and bus priority scheme, which I obviously had to go and have a look at to see if it was any good. I don't think it's a spoiler alert to say it has problems. The first obvious problem is just how temporary it all looks, which is, well, because it is. There are plans for a full scheme, eventually, inverted commas, but for now we have to make do with the supposed star attraction street of the city looking like this. Then you have this inexplicable loading bay arrangement outside the moon underwater. And for some reason it's unique to this single loading bay. All the other bays along the street are designed properly, but this one requires a HGV to drive down the cycle lane with nothing to tell you that happens. This restricted access single lane side street has this overzealous signal arrangement. Why? There's really no need for it. I mean, it's not like having the signals here makes any difference to taxi drivers whatsoever anyway, is it? It's not all negative though. The lack of traffic does make a much more inviting environment, with far more people walking around and socialising than there used to be historically. And there are a far higher number of cyclists using Deansgate than there ever used to be as well. But despite these positive behavioural changes, I just can't shake the feeling that this should be much better looking. It looks and feels like they couldn't really believe in what they were doing. It's all a bit cheap. It's not something that tells you Manchester is a global city. See, this disabled bay has been designed correctly. The cycle lane goes round the back, and therefore there's no conflict between the parked vehicles and cyclists, unlike that absolutely bizarre loading bay further up. One problem that does keep recurring is car drivers still don't seem to quite understand how traffic lights work, like this person who just quite happily runs the red. A more formal and permanent design would obviate the requirement for all these signal junctions. You could get away with zebras and slightly better infrastructure for everybody not driving. It's still car infrastructure at the end of the day. The challenge remains crossing Deansgate. There are a number of city streets which are going to always have to cross. This is not easily fixed, and it's something that Manchester City Council are at least aware of. But street connectivity is still posing a few concerns for local residents. They are feeling a bit boxed in. Traffic signs wise, it's all okay, I guess. Things aren't massively incorrect. But then you get this, which very few people bother to use because it's just like completely pointless. Why this short section outside the Rylands Library decides to become a bi-directional cycleway is anyone's guess. You tell me. Again, if we observe the crossing here, it's just not being used as designed because it makes no sense to an approaching cyclist. This crossing also would function a lot better as a zebra because people just cross on the green light anyway. A zebra would be far superior in this location. Despite the usual arguments from certain quarters, emergency vehicle access has not been impeded by this traffic scheme. What also amused me is this cyclist actually bothered to follow the layout as intended. I think they might have been doing that because I was filming rather than some sense of moral duty to follow what is frankly a nonsensical layout. There's no reason for this short stretch of bi-directional cycle lane here at all. What did then happen whilst I was filming was traffic started to build up quite significantly, and the reason for this is because at the time of filming there were roadworks on Quay Street, which meant I got distracted by this rather interesting sight of a dog in a cargo basket on a bike. So you can transport things on bikes, you know, it's not impossible. Anyway, I was digressing there. The roadworks on Quay Street were causing a complete gridlock, but nobody had thought to just continue to the next set of traffic lights on Deansgate and go around the blockage. I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that this sort of unthinking, well, I've always driven that way, or over-reliance on sat-navs rather than using your cognitive reasoning is why we have so much congestion in cities. Given recent traffic changes in this part of the city centre have made this pretty much a residents-only area, one does have to ask what a lot of these vehicles are doing. They can't all be residents. There isn't enough parking space in this part of the city centre for all the flats and everything to have individual cars. So, who are they? Where are they going? Why are they not on the ring road? It's not even as if the big traffic generators, for example Marks and Spencer's, are causing this traffic jam, because they exit down a different route. This just descended back into what I call old Deansgate. There are just too many interactions with Deansgate for it to ever have worked as a through route. That's why as early as 1945 plans are being drawn up for a ring road. And yes, I will cover that in more detail in the future, but this was always going to happen to Deansgate. Through traffic was always going to be taken off. Prior to the 1996 Arndale bombing, through traffic had been kind of redirected down Corporation Street. It only ended up back on Deansgate after the redevelopment of the Arndale Centre. This was never intended to be a traffic sewer. The amusing thing is though, the chaos did result in cyclists using the bi-directional lane as intended to get ahead of the queue, because as you can see behind the red car and taxi right now, there are stupidly placed bollards which make it impossible to safely cycle down the left hand side of a queue. It's just bad design. Whew, I feel better now. So, despite looking cheaper than a Temu fire sale and uglier than a Twitter troll's timeline, it has achieved some of its objectives. And yes, we need to ignore the problems caused by the roadworks on Key Street when this was filmed. This traffic jam was caused entirely by drivers failing to acknowledge an alternative route existed a single block away. This means I really must ask the question, if Manchester City Council knew deep down that this would work, why have they not done a proper job of it to begin with, and thus create that top-class avenue this thoroughfare has been crying out for ever since the Romans plonked the foundations for it here 2,000 years ago? All is not lost though, as plans do exist to actually formalise and improve Deansgate. I know figures like Chris Boardman have said that trial schemes are good to get public buy-in, but sometimes you've just got to bite the bullet and do a top-class scheme from the start. If you imply you haven't the confidence in a scheme's success, opponents will simply use this as an attack line. Despite culture war nonsense from certain political groups, doing the right thing does not mean doing the popular thing. Capital punishment is popular, and we're not rushing to bring that back, so why keep car dependency at the top of the agenda? Travel safe, and I'll see you next time.